In your wanderings, you stumble upon a ruined temple buried deep within the heart of the forest. Wary, you continue on through thick overgrowth until you see a clearing that was once an ancient cathedral built by people, now rebuilt by nature itself. In the center is a preserved altar, stacked with various dice of all shapes and colors. As you contemplate what this means, a cloaked figure approaches from the shadows.
Welcome, brave adventurer. Have you come to roll the dice? Explore strange new worlds with new strange rules? If you seek adventure worthy of being shared with good friends, you have come to the right place. Just roll for initiative.
Welcome to the Nat One Nerds podcast. How's it going, Brandon?
I'd say it's going pretty good.
Nice.
It's a long episode for that last one with the one shot.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I won't lie, I honestly forgot we were recording about 2/3 of the way through it. And then I was like, oh wait, this is for a podcast episode.
Yeah, make sure you're speaking up. But welcome everyone back to Nat One Nerds podcast. This is Brandon.
Yep, this is Parker.
And today we are doing our system review of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons.
Yep, this is our final episode for our D&D 5e arc, if you will.
Yeah, and we might have a few supplemental episodes that touch up on it, but this is the last of the series for Dungeons & Dragons, which means that we're excited to move on to other systems soon.
I know, we actually get to try out a brand new system, and like most of the listeners, we will just have no idea what we're getting into.
Of course, we're going to do some reading up and studying on it so we can actually give you some decent information, but as you guys know, if you've listened to our podcast before, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is our natural habitat. It's where we both end up playing most of our games, and it's honestly the only one either of us have played, so exploring other systems will definitely be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard and gotten a little familiar with a couple other systems, but not to the extent of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So it's just a staple classic. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so what we're, I will say though, as we review this system, that our opinions and ratings here are going to be pretty skewed because we
have nothing to compare it to.
We have nothing to compare it to at the moment, and we really like it. So
obviously, if we've been playing it pretty consistently for several years, it means that we're a fan of the system.
Yeah. So there's a pretty decent chance that down the road we'll have like a revisit episode to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and kind of re-rate it with a little more variety under our belts.
Oh yeah, and with new stuff coming out all the time, we'll definitely revisit systems we've already done, including 5th edition. So with that, let's get into our review and analysis.
Yeah.
So overall, What do you think of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons? I guess you kind of got into that a little bit.
I mean, as kind of stated before, it's the system that I got introduced into the tabletop role-playing world with, and it's developed some really hardcore, lifelong friendships, honestly.
Oh yeah, I'd say that's probably one of the best parts about any tabletop role-playing game is the bonds that you make with the people you play with, because honestly, if you spend 2 to 3 hours at a time on a regular basis with people doing pretty much anything, you're going to build some bonds with them. But the role-playing aspects and having fun and just sitting down and playing a game together, it really does help to make some good friends.
Yeah. Well, the thing with Dungeons & Dragons, too, I don't know. I'm really excited to see if other systems kind of have the same effect almost. But I feel like with Dungeons & Dragons, half the time, instead of saying, hey, I'm going to go play Dungeons & Dragons with my friends, I could literally be like, hey, I'm going to therapy session. And it would be just as accurate.
Yeah, it is pretty common for people to project onto their characters and work through stuff. Like, actually, ironically, we were going to play Dungeons & Dragons last Saturday, and it turned into just a mini therapy session because we got started, and we were like, you know what, screw it. Let's just go get some frozen yogurt and talk it out because we had all had a long week. So honestly, sometimes it can just turn into a therapy session.
Yeah. So, but that was really fun, though.
Overall, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is a pretty good system. I think one of my favorite aspects about it is how streamlined it is. It has a set of rules and guidelines to help you move through the system, and once you learn them, everything is pretty simple and straightforward. I think that's a huge strength for Dungeons & Dragons, but at the same time, I also say it's a little bit of a downside in the way of, because it's so streamlined and simplified, it kind of takes out a lot of flexibility and room for building, say, the perfect character that's exactly what you want it to be. You're kind of muscled into the specific classes and subclasses, and multi-classing gets messy. So that's something that Dungeons & Dragons could definitely improve on, but overall, I'd say it's a pretty good, straightforward system.
Yeah. No, definitely. So I would say that our impressions of the system are, again, a little biased, but we really like Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and would highly recommend it.
Now, as for doing the podcast on Dungeons & Dragons, I'd say that we were able to learn a decent amount. I, for one, did not expect the character creation episode to get so in-depth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sometimes I forget how many options there are when choosing a character between the classes, the subclasses, the races, and it gets even more complicated when you throw in, like, the Tasha's optional class features that they've released recently, and now they're getting into 1D&D. There's a lot of stuff going on. So, for those who are just diving into it right now, it may seem a bit messy, but you'll get the hang of it. You just got to grab on and get going.
I think it goes back to, though, just finding that solid group to be with. Because that's how it was for me. I found somebody invited me to join their D&D group. They knew I never played before. They thought I would really like it. And they were patient with me. They helped me build a character. Everybody was really understanding when it came to that combat scenario. Because in Dungeons & Dragons, if you're not thinking at least one step ahead during combat scenarios, it can really drag the session twice as long than planned.
Oh, yeah.
Or at least the combat portion of the story twice as long as you expected.
Yeah, I think a big bonus is if you have a good DM as a new player who's willing to help talk you through everything and help you learn. Because trying to pick up the system on your own, you're not going to get everything and you're going to make some mistakes. But again, that's something I feel like any tabletop role-playing game would have, is most of these tabletop role-playing systems have been around for quite a while. And so they've developed a lot of lore, a lot of rules, a lot of system information that's a lot to handle right off the bat. So having a good guide or a mentor to take you through it is definitely a huge help. Like I said, when I first started playing Dungeons & Dragons, I was really confused at how to add proficiency modifiers and any modifiers to attacks and stuff like that. So I did it wrong for like a month's worth of playing. And it happens. But over time you learn. And something else I like about pretty much any of the tabletop role-playing games, but Dungeons & Dragons especially, is you can choose how in-depth you want to go.
Yeah.
You can learn the basic rules and get enough to play and just goof off with your friends and have fun. Or you can fully nerd out, go learn all the lore about all the different settings, buy all the source books, and become a lore master. And honestly, it's the equivalent of getting like a bachelor's in D&D with how much information you have to shove in your head. And it's up to you what you want to do with it.
So, I was thinking about how many D&D books, like just Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition official books I have. I have 17.
That's decent little library you got there.
And that's not all of them. I know that's not all of them. Because my Dungeon Master in one of my campaigns that I play in, he buys every new D&D 5th edition book.
That gets a bit pricey because they release a lot, but honestly,
he owns his own practice.
Yeah, if you're into it, totally go for it. Like we both honestly want to have like a man cave someday where we just have all the books, the minis, nice gaming table set up, bunch of dice. Like we want to have a role-playing man cave someday.
You mean a nerd cave?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's be honest. It's a nerd cave.
It's a nerd cave. But hey, it's a nerd cave I'd be dang proud of.
It's really funny because with my job, I'll go to like different houses and do a particular service for different customers at their home. And every time I go to like the bigger homes, I'm like, if I own this home, that would be the D&D nerd room.
Oh yeah, with my old job, I used to clean carpets, and it gave me so many good ideas for like future homes and building like what I want and stuff like that. Service jobs are great for figuring out your dream home. They won't usually help you build it with financially, but they help you get ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, I've learned not to own a pool. I've learned not to do travertine paver stones.
Oh my gosh, please no.
Because apparently I've learned a lot of people have complained about ants underneath those.
It
Ants
etches
really-
like crazy too. It's so soft.
Yeah.
But anyways,
So,
um,
but I will say this. It's interesting too, and I'll this is something I was thinking about too. Learning, because the one shot we recently did, on the Syri 1313, because that's the name of the train, which I don't think the name ever actually got brought up in.
It did.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't quite remember. Again, I practically had almost forgot we were recording partway through because we were just having such a fun time that we just went all in. But running a one shot with your friends just at home by yourselves is a bit different than when you're recording it for a podcast episode. So that was a pretty big learning, pretty decent learning curve for me there.
Yeah, and I'd say it was a decent learning curve for our guests on there too. Being on a podcast in general is something where you got to remember to speak up, speak clearly, and make sure to keep people engaged, because if you're having constant lulls and it's quiet or you ramble on, like I'm probably doing right now, you lose attention. So, random little plug for podcasting can be hard sometimes.
Yeah, I would say too, especially, and we may have mentioned this in our Dungeon Master episode for D&D 5e. When you're being the Dungeon Master for players, it's really important to get to know your players and what kind of player they're going to be, because they're kind of what you mentioned earlier. There's that player that loves the lore, and if you can throw a little like oh, there's you find a wizard approaches you and he's wearing all red robes. For somebody that's really big into D&D lore, they actually know and start to suspect, like, is it this? Is it this? It's kind of like when Tolkien fans watch Rings of Power, they love the little nuances and references to like the movies and stuff. But at the same token, they also get mad when there's no reference to Tolkien whatsoever.
Or they make a reference incorrectly.
Yeah, exactly. So
But like a new player would look at this wizard in all red and be like, cool, it's a wizard that likes the color red. Maybe he uses fire.
Yeah, it doesn't take away from the new player, but it makes the lore dude just... It's such a simple little thing. And as a dungeon master, you don't need to know all the lore. You don't even need to be the same level as that player, per se, if they're really into it. But if you can do it just enough for them to appreciate it, then it'll make the world a difference. And on the flip side, the player obviously shouldn't be expecting the DM to know all that lore, because the DM has to plan all the lore and all the things, and he's got other players to cater to a little bit. You don't want to cater to one too much, but getting to know your players and just having that in the back of your mind as you're preparing sessions is always a good idea.
I mean, and that's another big strength that 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons has, is there's a lot that's left up to DM interpretation, which means you can adjust the lore as much as you want, which is really helpful when you have those super experienced players in your party, because say it's a player that's played for years, DM'd very many times, and you put them up against the monster. As soon as you say what it is, they're going to know exactly what it is, its stats, immunities, weaknesses. But you as a DM can tweak it. You can change its armor class, its health, give it a different ability. You can make it so that that wizard in red belongs to a completely different organization than who that player thinks it is. Mm-hmm. And it adds for a lot of fun twists and turns that the DM can do to help spice things up and keep them lively.
Same thing if you're using a pre-made adventure module. D&D 5th edition has been around for a number of years now. A lot of experienced players have played at least a good 2 or 3, so if you happen to do a module, a pre-made one, or a pre-made adventure, they may know that adventure front and back, but if you suddenly throw in this completely different side quest that can still tie back into the story, it makes for a fun time. But again, it's that balance as a dungeon master of being prepared and being ready, but also allowing the flexibility to improv and because again, you don't know what your players are going to do. You have no idea.
You never know what your players
now,
are going to do.
if you are absolutely sure that your players are going to choose the right path versus the left path, then you can plan for the right all you want. But if you're going to plan that much for the right path, you should probably plan almost that much for the left path.
Honestly, I've always found that...
Or if they just trailblaze.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've found that the best method is just to make the plan, cut that path, and then fill the forest with everything you can think of for when they eventually run into it.
Yep.
Because they are never going to do exactly what you think they're going to do.
Yeah.
Players are unpredictable.
Yeah.
And different players have different levels of unpredictability. Some players, like I myself, when I play, because I've DM'd enough, I love getting to explore what the DM has created for me. So I can recognize those plot hooks that the DM throws out for me. I recognize what they're trying to do, and I'll go along with it because I love getting to help build a story collaboratively with everyone.
You're a narrative player.
Yeah, I love the narrative. Then there are other players like my sister-in-law who is here with the one-shot, who, when she plays, she is just a pure agent of chaos. She does absolutely whatever the heck she wants, and oftentimes she'll honestly do whatever she can to make sure the DM doesn't get to go through with his plans.
The chaotic neutral player.
Yep. It's the player's alignment, not the characters. And so players vary a lot, which means that it's good to have a system as flexible as 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons where you can adjust to that. Granted, there's only so much you can adjust to a player that just wants to destroy the campaign. But
yeah. I should also, if we're going to mention player categories, I should also mention the min-max players. Who love
I'm a little guilty.
They love to work in the mechanical loopholes and just be able to just max out. Like if their character is going to be good at something, they're going to be just as good as they freaking mechanically possibly can. Now, the good thing as a DM, as you said, being the dungeon master, is that if they get a little too much, veto it.
Yep.
Just have an honest conversation with them and be like, hey, this is really cool what you built. And acknowledge, because a lot of times it's really cool, but it's like, but this player it's all about the role playing. This player is all about the narrative. You know, if most of them are about the narrative or about the role playing, then having a min-max character might jar that a little bit.
Yeah, and it's always important to have a good balance among your players. Like, having a min-maxer in your party, if they keep it reined in, is not too big of a deal. Because, honestly, I feel like it lets that role player focus more on role-playing because they have someone else to dish out the damage for them, and they can go do their fancy stuff.
Well, sometimes the min-max player also can get even more into the role-playing aspect because they've thrown everything. So I have a buddy that I love him the bit. He always plays the barbarian, and he always does... I think he does... no, it's not the Way of the Totem, or it's not the Path of the Totem. It's not
the Bear Totem?
No, it's... I'd have to double check. But he even picks almost the same subclass.
Mm-hmm.
Like, out of all the campaigns I've done with them, adventures that we've done, I think we've done like 4 now. 3 of them have been Goliath barbarians. And
if he knows what he likes.
Yeah, that's just what he really likes. That's what brings him joy, and he loves kind of breaking it a little bit. But he also, because of that, he's able to lean into that with the role playing. For him, it allows him to be like, okay, like I'm this kind of barbarian, like, you know, I have a little bit of anger issues, so he leans into that as a personality. He just has that type of personality just kind of tweaked a little bit with each different character. So it's really interesting, and he recently did a dwarf fighter. He said it was okay. He actually just changed classes with the DM's permission. Now he's a dwarf barbarian.
To be fair, I have found that I really gravitate towards paladins. That happens to be my favorite class. I love how balanced they are. Like, you're a little bit of tanky, a little bit of spellcaster, a little bit of martial. I feel like a paladin is just that perfect mix. So I find I almost always end up gravitating towards them.
Yeah, I can totally see that. See, when I play, I've had, let's see, my first character was a human ranger. And then I jumped to a tiefling bard. Then I jumped to a tiefling artificer. Then I jumped to a Dampier Ranger. Different subclass than my first one. And then I have just gone into a tiefling bard / ranger character. And my backup is a wizard.
As I say, you do seem to have a little bit of an affinity for rangers, but you're not quite as stuck on.
No, if I were to say if I have a favorite class, I would probably say Ranger's my favorite class because I feel like it's just a versatile class. It may not be the most powerful. Honestly, it's definitely not the most powerful class in 5th edition. But I think they're, from what I've heard in the announcements for, because Wizards of the Coast have made the announcement of 1D&D, which is their playtest material for the next edition, which honestly it just sounds like 5.5 edition.
Yeah,
which is what I'm personally calling it until otherwise noted. But right now they're not very powerful, but they're just fun. I have a fun time. Although the bard's kind of fun. I don't usually play charismatic characters, so when I do, it's kind of, I end up kind of annoying everybody else because everybody else has like serious characters, and I'm like, hey.
Oh, see, I'm always all about the charisma characters because I like playing a smooth talker and one who can like, I like being the party face. It's kind of fun.
I just like being weird. my ranger bard, so she started as a bard, but she got transported to the Feywild and had to learn ranger skills to survive in the Feywild, and then now she suddenly came back, and her music instruments of choice are an ocarina, panpipes, a lute, and her personal favorite, a jaw harp.
That's an interesting one.
So I really want to show up to a session one day with a jaw harp and just so every time our DM's like, okay, roll for performance to see if you earn anything, I'm like, I pull up my jaw harp. He's like, oh gosh. So I'm like, no offense to people that play jaw harp, I think it's really cool. I just don't know how.
It's just a very different instrument to what people are used to.
But I like being weird.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be charismatic, that's how I play charismatic characters. That they're weird.
Yeah.
And they're like either annoyingly optimistic or it's.
See, and that goes again to show the versatility of when I play charismatic characters, I tend to go more diplomatic charismatic. I like to be the problem solver and the mediator and one who goes in and gets things done.
Yeah. I've noticed that with your current character.
That also kind of projects me in real life. I always like to be the problem solver and mediator between people. So as you said, it can be a little bit of therapy in a session because people tend to project themselves into their characters.
Is that why you choose noble background too a little bit?
Not really. I don't feel like my background's very noble in real life. I come from an average family.
Yep.
So now that we've gotten a good deal in about our opinions about the system, let's give some official ratings.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and explain this so that we can set up for future episodes here. So the rating of the system, we have, let's see, 1, 2, 3. We have 5 categories that I've come up with. Number 1, character creation. 2, role-playing. Combat, mechanics, and complexity. And it's a 1 to 10.
I feel like that's pretty comprehensive, though, being able to split a system into those 5 categories. It covers... It kind of makes me think of in games when you have, like, the skill matrix, where it kind of, like, shows how strong you are in each direction.
Yeah.
So, let's get this ball rolling. As for character creation, how did you feel about it?
I gave it a solid 5.
Okay.
Because I feel like Dungeons & Dragons has, especially with the release of Xanathar's Guide to Everything and then Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, it's given the classes so many more subclass options and like backgrounds and features that you can get. So there's so many options to choose from, and it's fun to explore. But the thing is that there's a ton of options, but you still have to pick from those options. And obviously, as a dungeon master, you can be like, okay, I allow for unofficial stuff. Because Wizards of the Coast has called Unearthed Arcana, where that's where they do all their playtest material for each for each edition of Dungeons and Dragons, so they can play test and get feedback on it. So sometimes Dungeon Masters will be like, okay, I will allow anything in the Unearthed Arcana. Because usually, sometimes they can be a little bit broken. But even for... They still do a little play testing themselves, I feel like, before throwing it out there.
I still remember in our second campaign, I think it was, that we played together, I had an armor artificer back when the artificer was still in the Unearthed Arcana. And the armor was a little bit more powerful back then than it is in the published materials right now.
Yeah.
And I remember Parker had a hard time with my character because that's one we've discussed, where he had 23 AC at level 3. And he also had the Unearthed Arcana version of the armor, had an ability where in combat you could basically generate like 7 temporary HP for yourself every turn. And between that and my armor, he just could not take me down. And
that system was broken. That one was broken.
It made for just ridiculous slog fests of combat.
I ended up having to just throw, if he like came across goblins, I'm just like, 10 more appear and they all go after you. Because none of them can hit you.
Didn't you throw a Death Knight at us at level 3?
Yeah, I did throw a Death Knight at you guys at level 3 because I was like, I'm tired of this.
And I still tanked it. Well, my party beat it up from a distance.
They were wise to do so from a distance.
Meanwhile, I'm just sitting there punching out a Death Knight.
Yeah,
neither of us are hitting anything because the Death Knight's armor was ridiculous too.
Yeah. Your character needed that though. That was the only way that would make you feel threatened at all.
So... But as for character creation, I chose to give it an 8 out of 10.
Oh.
I was a little more generous because I like how beginner-friendly the character creation is in Dungeons & Dragons, and that's one of the things I was giving a big amount of points for. In the way of, if you use any of the pre-made character creation apps or sites, it's so streamlined and easy. You just... pick a race and it lays out exactly what it does for you. You pick a class and it lays it out. It lets you pick your starting equipment from like a suggested list. And once you understand the system a little bit, character creation just is pretty easy. But why I docked points is because in the current state of 5th edition D&D, it's kind of in a transition phase like we've talked about between... They've had the established 5th edition rules for several years. Then within the past few years, they released Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Monsters of the Multiverse, and reworked, honestly, like half the character creation options.
Yeah.
And because of that, there's a big old mess of which version do I use? What does this do? How do I mix and match? What's my DM's rulings on this? And now they've got one D&D throwing another monkey wrench in there where they are literally just completely reworking all the classes and races.
Yeah.
So... because of the current state of it, it's really messy, which is where I docked points from. And
it can be pretty overwhelming for a new player.
It can be.
Yeah.
But I feel like if you give it another year or two for them to really get one D&D rolling and you can see the system as a whole, because they've just been revealing little bits at a time, I feel like that will clear the water up a lot more and make that easier.
Yeah, once 5.5, because again, that's what I think it's going to be. It's going to be 5th edition compatible, but it's going to be its own edition at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's where the 5.5 comes from. But yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. I actually didn't consider that too much. I just was looking at it and I'm like, there's a lot of cool stuff. There are so many cool stuff and it's super fun to, because me and you, we make characters just for funsies at lunch.
Yeah, that was another
work.
thing I factored in for the score is if I'm sitting there making characters for fun and just going through concepts, I think it's probably a decent system.
Yeah. No, it is. And I wasn't trying to be harsh when I personally gave that.
It's honest.
Yeah, I gave it a 5 just because, again, I feel like you have all these options, but number one, it can be overwhelming. And number two, once you choose an option, you're that. Mm-hmm. You know, you choose the artificer class, you're an artificer. And now, as far as role-playing, like, you can obviously do whatever you want in role-playing. Like, again, there's no restriction on that, per se. But especially when it comes to, like, combat, or when mechanics are involved in any way, shape, or form, you are just an artificer. Like, you're in that. It's a box, but if you want to call it a good box or a bad box, it's completely up to you.
Yeah,
That's
I think
just-
I can
that's-
agree with that.
That's all I'm saying. So I don't know. I guess if I were to reread, I probably would maybe give it a 6, but I'm gonna stick with my 5 because I just know that there are other systems where you can literally have any kind of character in any way, shape, or form, and still have it work for the system.
Yeah, and I would say that with character creation, some suggestions for how to improve it. I think this is my own personal opinion. I think that moving a little bit away from the strict classes and things like that would be a benefit, and institute more of maybe a tree system where you could start out as a fighter, but instead of having to full-on multi-class into something else if you want to branch out, just sprout a little branch into like paladin or into rogue or something like that, and like maybe adopt a few elements of theirs in sacrifice of your own instead of having to basically build this weird hybrid character. I feel like that would help a lot with versatility.
Yeah, I would be down to help with that. That'd be cool.
But again, it's up to Wizards of the Coast what they do with the system. So,
Or we can just make our own system after a while.
I mean, honestly, maybe that could be like the final episode of the podcast is working on making our own system after we've taken the best of each one.
Yeah, for real.
That could be a big project. That'd be fun.
Oh my gosh, that would be so fun.
So the next category would be role playing. I'll go first on this one. This one I chose to give it a 4 because
You're still more generous than I was.
that's because I love Dungeons and Dragons.
I guess I'm just a harsh grader. I don't know.
But overall, the role playing in Dungeons and Dragons, I think we've agreed, is pretty weak.
Yeah. I was about to say my grade for, or at least my rating, I should say, for role playing for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, I gave it a 2. Just because I feel like role playing is a huge part of Dungeons and Dragons and really any tabletop.
But there's
RPG.
no guidance or system for it.
No, as far when you're looking at the rules, like the best they have is usually just pages of suggestion. Like
Yeah.
it's more like a coaching thing, but there's no actual mechanics. There's no numbers. There's nothing to really encourage it. The only thing that encourages role playing is the dungeon master. The dungeon master is the one that has to be like, okay, like he has to get creative to bring out scenarios to where people's characters are like, oh, that's totally what I would do. And then if you continue to do that, players do eventually get into I can role play,
Yeah.
because it can be a little overwhelming. So,
And that's, like we've said, the thing with role playing in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is that it's so abstract. There's, like Parker said, there's no systems to it. It's literally just you and your friends at the table goofing off and talking how your characters would talk. And like there's some things you can use in it, like prestidigitation, druidcraft, like little cantrips and things like that you can use for role playing. And there's like various charisma checks, like persuasion and deception and things like that. But
thaumaturgy is another.
thaumaturgy, yeah. But overall, roleplay is very much just free play in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. And honestly, some people would think that's a huge benefit.
Yeah.
But as a system, the fact that the system itself has no guidance or any rules or anything really at all about role-playing, it's just you interacting with the other players, means that it definitely needs some work from both of our eyes.
Yeah. And again, the books will talk about role-playing in them, but again, there's no actual mechanics. There's nothing really built into the system. Because for Dungeons and Dragons, what the system really dives forward is actually into our next topic here, or next category, and that's combat.
Right.
What did you give combat?
I give combat an 8 out of 10.
Okay, I did too. I gave it an 8.
Combat in 5th edition is one thing that they do really well.
Oh, they excel at this.
Their streamlined system, they're very... It's a good mix of complex yet simple rules about combat, where once you learn them, it all kind of flows together. I think combat feels good in 5th edition.
Yeah, I think combat's very fun. Because it's one of those systems where if you go without combat for too long, even the role-playing people will eventually start getting a little bored.
Yeah.
Because again, the system is built to have combat in it. Now, Wizards of the Coast did publish... trying to remember the name of it. I don't have it. It's that adventure module.
The potion.
The Witch Light Beyond the
Wild Beyond the Witchlight.
Wild Beyond the Witchlight. Yeah, that adventure module actually presents encounters, but that book actually encourages you and gives you options to actually avoid physical combat.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the one adventure module where you actually don't have to do a lot of combat because that's what that adventure is made to do. So it's definitely more for the role playing side. So I don't know. Maybe if I actually had read that book, maybe I would give the role playing a 3 at least, like another number or 2 up. But
I mean, in the end, it doesn't change the system.
It doesn't change the overall system now. But I just wanted to bring that up. But
yeah. As for combat, the only points that I really deducted were from the fact that it can drag on sometimes, and I feel like initiative is kind of uncreative. You just kind of get your turn, and everyone goes on their turn. Mm-hmm. And I personally don't have too many suggestions, but I feel like there's some way they could make it just more interactive. I feel like combat is very much of you do your turn, and then you just kind of sit and wait till your next turn.
Yeah.
Well, which, if you have slow players at your table, can be torture.
I will say, though, for combat in D&D, if players, when it's not their turn, are thinking ahead and preparing, if they're thinking of a couple options that their character can do next turn, like, hey, if the battle starts going like this, or the encounter starts going like this, I can do this, and if it starts going like this, I can do this. There will still be instances where something completely drastically changed, especially when the Dungeon Master decides to throw a dragon into the mix suddenly out of nowhere. Like, halfway through initiative, all of a sudden, like, a black dragon appears. Yeah, you're going to be thrown off, and people are going to take a little longer on their turn to figure it out. But if you're thinking ahead, then it should be a little more smoother. And as you're kind of saying, when they're just sitting there, they don't have to just sit there. Yeah, you can still be proactive for yourself in figuring out, okay, this is what I can potentially do here.
I've just found that off-turn combat is when a lot of players end up diving into their phones and
that's true,
getting lost in social media.
Yeah, the Dungeon Master, between this episode and the Dungeon Master episode, I think we're making it very clear how hard the Dungeon Master role can be.
Honestly, they do set the pace.
Yeah.
And a good Dungeon Master can make combat a lot more interesting. That's just my one qualm is combat itself can drag. Action economy is kind of a mess. For example, in one of my campaigns, I had a player who was a druid who focused around getting as many actions as possible through summoning things. And it destroyed the action economy and made combat a drag. Because when it got to this player, we'd have to go through like 8 different actions between all the different critters and her pets. And it was a bit of a nightmare. So if they could fix action economy a little bit and make off turns a little more interactive, I feel like combat would be perfect.
One thing I will say about the action economy, so just as a refresher, when we're saying the action economy, we're talking about your turn during initiative. So everybody rolls initiative that determines who goes in what order. And on your turn, you have an full-blown action, which at low levels is just one attack or one action. And at higher levels, that one action can equivalent to 2 attacks.
Depending on your class.
But again, it's still, those 2 attacks are still considered one action. So outside of the action, you have your bonus action, you have your
reaction,
your movement, and then if needed, you have a reaction that can be outside of your turn, and that's your action economy. Yeah. And I will say that some classes utilize the bonus actions way more than other classes. So, like, for instance, my favorite class, the Ranger,
they got bonus actions out the wazoo.
It depends on what you got prepared.
Yeah.
So usually,
or like with a rogue, they have hides, dashes, disengages, all those bonus actions. So,
Well, I was thinking that for a lot of times, and maybe I'm not always playing the Ranger correctly, and that's always a possibility. But for me, I feel like the Ranger, I utilize the bonus actions of the Ranger almost like a Paladin would, where they infuse their weapons to be able to do more.
Yeah.
So, because I look at a lot of the spells the Rangers have, and it's a full-blown action. The other thing, too, is that some of the spells they have, like Vicious Mockery for bards, where you can insult somebody and cause psychic damage to them, requires you to see the target, even though it's the hearing that actually hurts you.
Yeah.
And so I was in some scenarios where I would try to throw my voice, like to make like a spookier, if like trying to like intimidate them at the same time. And then the DM's like, well, the spell says you have to be in like, but you're the dungeon master. Can you just like cross that out? Like,
yeah, Dungeon Masters, it depends on how much they're willing to fudge the rules and allow, a lot of people call it rule of cool.
Yeah.
Where if you do something that's cool enough or fun enough or a cool enough interaction, then DMs will let you do it even though it slightly violates some rules. As long as it doesn't break the game.
Yeah. I don't know. So, but yeah, as we said, I mean, outside of that, again, I just feel like there are some classes that definitely utilize the bonus action a bit more than other classes. Because there'll be times where like players are like, oh, I can't do anything because all I have is a bonus action left and I don't have anything that I can bonus action with.
Yeah.
And that can kind of suck. So maybe it's not just classes, maybe it's just the options to create bonus actions is a lot more limited. So unless you do it exactly right, but if it goes against what you want to build and play as, then...
Well, it's also something that, as a DM, you factor in building encounters with turn economy, which is kind of like the action economy, where you want to have a difficult enough encounter that your players are going to find it to be challenging. But you don't want to slog them down with fighting 30 goblins at once as a level 10 party. Because while it's not going to be challenging for them, it's going to take them a while to slug through that many goblins.
Yeah. Yeah. More creatures doesn't equal more fun.
Yeah.
So, not automatically anyway.
But at the same time, if you just have one creature, it can be a really powerful one, but a big enough party of adventurers can take it down even if they're much lower leveled than it. Like, for example, with that Death Knight, it was taken down by a group of level 3 players because he got 1 turn per round. Meanwhile, we got 5.
Yeah.
And those 5 turns, even though we were weaker, we slowly whittled them down because we got so many hits off.
Yeah. Because if he missed on his attack...
his whole turn's gone.
Yeah, his whole turn's gone.
Meanwhile, we could miss 4 out of 5 of our attacks, but we're still doing damage to him.
Yeah, exactly. So you got to keep that in consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say, if your party purposely falls into the middle of an orc army, that's their fault. So
yeah.
So again, allow consequence for player choice, or I should say consequence for character choice.
Yeah. Now, as for our next category, mechanics, I chose to give it a 7. Where were you?
I actually gave it an 8.
Oh, I actually went lower for one.
I know.
So what did you choose to give it an 8 for?
I think you kind of touched on it earlier, actually. It's complex enough to have options and workarounds and loopholes, because some people have a fun time playing with the mechanics of a game. Mm-hmm. So there has to be a certain amount of mechanics to play with to have that kind of fun. But I feel like as you said, once you learn it, it's great.
Yeah.
You know, it functions, it works. Again, I feel like there's a reason Dungeons & Dragons is kind of the staple of the TTRPG world. You know, it's just the go-to.
Yeah, one of the reasons I marked it a little bit lower is because with the mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, I feel like they can be a bit rigid at times, which is evidenced by the massive homebrew community.
Yeah.
People are always feeling the need to make their own items, their own classes, their own subclasses, because they feel the mechanics don't allow for what they're wanting to do. And that simplified system kind of quashes the creativity a little bit and makes it so that people have to go out of their way to do what they're trying to do.
That's a good point. That's actually good.
So that's why I chose to give it a 7 out of 10, because as we've said, it's very good, streamlined, easy to understand if you're willing to put in the effort. But because it's good and streamlined, it also makes it a little harder to get that wiggle room for when you want to build a very specific character.
Yeah. Yeah, the more specific you want to get into Dragons, it can get a little harder as you go.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Overall complexity.
I chose a 6.
I also gave it a 6.
As for complexity, I think the reason I gave it the 6 has to go around to my point from earlier of right now, the system of 5th edition is a little bit of a mess. There's like 3 different variations of every class currently out, a bunch of weird variations of subclasses. There's the old versions of races and the new versions from the Monsters of the Multiverse changing it around. And overall, everything's just a little muddy right now.
A little more money than it probably... They could have prevented it from being so muddy.
Yeah, they're not doing a very clean transition between systems.
I feel like they're kind of dragging their feet in the mud, if you will. Going from one edition, like it's almost like they want to go on to the next edition, but 5th edition has probably been honestly...
It's been absolutely their most popular one.
Yeah, the most popular version of Dungeons & Dragons.
It saved Dungeons & Dragons from the brink because it was starting to die off a little bit.
Yeah, it was. But then they did 5th edition and then Stranger Things, and like it just started coming back into...
It's becoming much more mainstream.
Yeah, it is.
But
heck, you got pro athletes that play Dungeons & Dragons. Like, they love it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we had some that played before. They just were not willing to publicize it.
There's a couple that do.
Well, I'm saying before they wouldn't have been willing.
Gotcha.
Back in the good old days when Dungeons & Dragons was equivalent to summoning Satan in your basement, it's like, no, we're just playing a game, Mom and Dad. It's okay. Calm down.
Makes me think of that episode from Young Sheldon where his religious mother comes in during the time when people thought Dungeons & Dragons was like almost satanic, which it isn't. We're going to make this very clear. It's not satanic.
It's literally just friends sitting around a table playing games together and pretending to be fantasy people.
Yeah. It's just like theater.
Yeah.
Theater of the mind. Yeah. So, but she walked in and she's like, "Oh, what game are you playing?" Right? And so he's like, "Oh, Dungeons and Dragons," and and then she's like, "Oh, that sounds fun." He's like, "Yeah, we're on a quest to find the pitchfork of a devil." Right? and I just remember the voiceover just being like, "Now, my mother didn't care or believe in fairies, elves, stuff like that, but she did believe the Bible, and she believed in the devil." And then the next scene, she's like sitting with like the pastor of her church, like trying to figure out what to do about the satanic game. But
yeah,
it's just really funny. But
so overall complexity, it's not the system itself; it's the current state is just really funky.
Yeah, but the current state of the system affects the system.
Yes,
so
it feels almost like they're trying to transition to the new system. But the reason they're dragging their feet is they don't want to tick off all the people that love 5th edition by changing those core features that they love and hold dear.
Are they turning into Lucasfilm?
Basically. I mean, it's Wizards of the Coast, which is owned by Hasbro. Does it surprise you?
No, not really. Because Lucasfilm does that a lot. They promise things and then, nope.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of wonder because they talk about 1D&D being compatible with 5th edition, but a lot of the stuff is like straight up complete reworks. And I'm like, how are you going to make that compatible?
Yeah, I don't know. So, but then again, it's the 1D&D stuff right now is all playtest and it's subject to complete change. So hopefully...
That and they're releasing it in pieces, so we don't even have the full picture. So something that may look completely bonkers or really weak or just weird... It's because we have a small segment of it, and we don't know how everything's going to fit together in the end.
Yeah.
Which I wish they would reveal more at a time than they are for that, because I feel like we can't give accurate feedback if they're not giving us enough to actually judge it.
Yeah. And that's why, hopefully by the time after we've done probably, I would say at least 3 to 4 systems, come back to this episode, do a revisit, but be able to talk about the 1D&D stuff, or 5.5.
Yeah.
Or I guess it could be 6, but I think it's going to be 5.5 because 5th edition's so popular.
So after we have those 5 categories down, the overall grade we're giving to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
I do want to say one thing, though. Were you rating this based off 1 being the worst and 10 being the best? Because that's how I was rating. Okay,
yes.
Okay, we're cool. Okay. Because there's some people that think a little differently, and they're like,
we're good.
Okay, good. So, I actually, what's nice about Google is that you can just ask it a math question, and it just gives you the answer.
Did you average out your scores?
I just asked what 29 out of 40 would be percentage-wise, and it gave me the answer.
See, I just went with my gut reaction of overall, how do I feel about the system?
Oh, I can. Maybe I'll do both. I don't know.
So, what grade did Google give 5th edition from your scores?
It's kind of weird. I'm an English major, and I went with like the really mathy answer. Maybe I'm more like my dad than I think I am. I don't know. He's an engineer. So mathematically, total was a 29 out of 40, which is a 72.5%.
So C-.
Yeah. But honestly, I would probably give it gut reaction. I would probably give it closer to like a C plus, B minus, probably. But again, I think there's a little biasism in that, and I'll admit that.
Yeah. I overall decided to give it an A minus just because I love it, but I feel like it has a little room to improve.
Okay.
But overall, I feel like it's a really good system that works as it is.
But yeah, so ultimately, would we recommend this system to anybody? Absolutely.
So what is your gut reaction grade? You said like a...
I probably would give it a B.
Okay.
Just because I don't want to be too biased because I'm really excited about some of the systems we're going to be looking forward to. So I think there's a little hesitancy because I don't know what else is out there.
Yeah. And I think it'd be fun to revisit these grades after we've done a couple other systems that have comparison. Yeah. But gut reaction is A minus, but if I was going more mathematically, it'd probably be closer to a B for me too.
Yeah.
So I think we can both say a B is a fair grade.
Yeah. So between numbers and overall impression, just a B, solid B. Which honestly, that's pretty good, man.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
I mean, considering how much goes into making a tabletop role-playing system.
Oh my gosh, it's
like,
hard.
I don't know how these people do it. Like, I know it takes entire teams of people years to build a system, but oh my gosh, it is hard work, and I applaud them for it. Like, I know that they're making a mess of it right now, but they are working so hard.
I still appreciate them working on it. Like, the fact, it's kind of like, I'm going to go back to the Star Wars analogy here a little bit, back to Lucasfilm. I may not like everything Lucasfilm is doing with Star Wars, but am I glad that they're still making Star Wars stuff, like new stuff to look forward to and just to watch, or even just new stuff to critique? Yes. I'm glad that they're doing it.
I mean, to be completely fair, I kind of gave up on Star Wars once Disney bought it.
Fair.
They've had one or two gems, but you have to dig through the crap to find them.
It's also kind of how I feel about Rings of Power. Am I liking it? Am I watching it though? Yes.
See, with Rings of Power, I've found that if you watch it just as its own show without comparing it to the source material, which takes conscious effort to do, as its own standalone show, it's pretty solid.
I'm trying to do that.
You're too much of a Tolkien buff.
Yeah. Well, I've read The Silmarillion. I've read Unfinished Tales Parts 1 and 2.
This man could have a bachelor's in Tolkien alone.
I mean, that's what I'm kind of working on. Probably if I ever went for a master's degree, it'd probably, like, my thesis, it'd probably be Tolkien related. So, or Lewis, one of the two. So,
anyways, overall, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is great. We absolutely suggest it to anyone that wants to play tabletop role-playing games. And we really look forward to going through some new systems with you guys.
Yep.
We plan on doing a few supplementary episodes between systems, like, for example, our next episode. We plan on talking about our favorite specific modules from 5th edition that we've done, and a little bit about that.
Yeah, and we're hoping to have a fellow content creator guest on that episode, too. I think it'll be fun to get another opinion on that.
Oh, yeah.
So, because, again, I have, like, 15 to 17 books alone. So, hopefully they have other books that I haven't even thought about or read yet. So,
I mean, to be fair, I have no idea how big my library is because I have mine all electronically. So I just kind of, it's bad. I just kind of buy books willy-nilly and read through them.
I like shiny book covers.
See, my thing is I hate clutter. So I try to avoid having more physical objects than I need.
I like books. I like physical books. I like the smell of physical
books. To each their own. I would love to own the physical books. We just don't have the space for it right now.
Yeah, I'm making space.
So that's our overall review of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
Yep.
We hope that our episodes on the system will help some of you guys learn a little bit more. Those of you who are new, I hope that you can get enough information to be able to pick it up and start playing. And we absolutely suggest that you do. It's a great system, a lot of fun. It has its quirks and its flaws, but overall, we think it's pretty good.
It's honestly, as I said, it's with the right group, it can be a legit therapy session, but the funnest version of therapy session.
Oh, yeah.
So, but hopefully for those who are a little more experienced, hopefully that you still got something out of these episodes. And
even if it was a few chuckles at our mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah, for reals.
Because we will not claim to be experts at anything. We've only been playing this for a few years, and we know that there are people who have been playing this for decades.
Yeah.
So
there are people that they started off with 2nd edition or 3.5.
Yeah, my dad started 1st edition in college, actually no, in high school with his friends. So ironically, in the current campaign I'm running with my dad and my wife and my cousin, my dad revived his very first character from 1st edition Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, what was it? I need to know now.
Goliath monk.
Okay.
Really big guy that punches stuff. So it's been really fun watching him see the differences between the systems. But thank you guys again so much for listening. We hope to hear from you guys about feedback, what you liked, what you didn't like, what you'd like to hear.
Or if you still have questions on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, send us your questions. Because if we may even potentially put your question as a social media post so that other people can see.
Yeah.
So
no, we love interaction. We love you guys for listening. Mm-hmm. Remember to reach out to us at Nat1Nerds Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And we have nat1nerdspodcast@gmail.com if you want to email us. So let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you want to hear. And this is Nat1Nerds signing off. Until next time.
Happy rolling, guys.